I'm going to start very broadly because, as we can see from the title of the talk, this needs some contextualizing, particularly if there's people who are not quite sure where this would fit into a larger picture. And it's very easy to do, to put this into a larger picture, because we are at this fascinating time where we are changing the ray cycles. Interestingly enough, something Tim and I had touched on by email briefly about the importance of understanding the energies through the ray psychology that are available in the 2000 years cycles that we have, where one particular sign predominates. And in that particular sign, we will have a mix or blend of divine energies. So before I look at that, there's an even wider point here. A theosophist said to me, somebody I know very well, why are you trying to make some of these theosophical talks so scientific? And I said, well, if I could politely remind you of objective 3 of the TS, which is to investigate the unexplained laws of nature. And what else have we had since 1900, and it's in its infancy at 120 plus years old, is the advent of a physics that has turned science upside down. And there is no agreement. There is no agreement as to what these startling phenomena that we see in the inner worlds, the microscopic worlds, what they mean. And theosophy has come from the other end. It's come from top down with the masters. And they've given us this information about the subtle worlds and subtle matter. And the scientists, not understanding theosophy in many instances, there are some, Rupert Sheldrake, obviously, a great speaker at the TS, and some wonderful books on my bookshelf by that man, more on the biological side of things, morphological fields. The idea that energy is being discovered, which actually fits in to the theosophical paradigm. And science has taken it by the scruff of the neck and said, we can talk about consciousness now. And so how many volumes of New Scientist have I got, where in the last 20 years, they've been talking, the scientists, Scientific American as well, obviously, all around the world have been talking about consciousness because of the advent of quantum physics. Prior to that, it was very much for societies like the Theosophical Society and esoteric groups to kind of keep consciousness to themselves. And so I'm thinking, what a wonderful opportunity this, and I know I have, people with us like Tim, who are very like-minded to me, knocking on the door of the TS and saying, for heaven's sake, we've got to do some matching up of the some of the revelations of quantum physics with what we already know as theosophists. And I've been working on this probably for about 15 years now, on and off because of my other commitments, to try and pull together ideas, because I am a physicist at university, I studied quantum physics, and now I see that that was very quantitative and had a lot of horrible mathematics in it, which I'm not going to attempt to throw at you today. But the idea of a qualitative analysis of it is important. And so to investigate the unexplained laws of nature, come on, TS, wake up. We must start looking seriously at what these links are. And I mean, a few years ago, I'm looking at the book now, The Snake in the Rope, Eddie Billimoria started to look at this. I've had people like Capri and various other commentators who have realized that there is a link that needs to be studied and explained. And so that's the importance when we get down to entanglement, spiritual and karmic links. Let's even take it a bit further on the ray psychology side, and that is the importance of science now. Jesus didn't talk much about science 2,000 years ago. And I was looking, because I'm doing a talk on it, at the volume on science with Isis Unveiled. Madame Blavatsky, this is so rudimentary in terms of science, but in fairness to the dear lady, it was at the end of the 2,000 years of Pisces. Science was not a subject that had been the focus of attention of humanity, because the controlling rays were rays 2 and ray 6. Ray 2, the ray of love, wisdom, and the Christ principle, and ray 6, the ray of devotion and the Jesus principle, the principle which mushroomed out into all the religions. And so, to remind us of the ray psychology, and I think it should never be forgotten in any of my talks, we know we have the Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, which is ray 1, will, ray 2, love, and ray 3, mind. We understand that Trinity. But the 4 rays of attribute are 4 art, 5 science, 6 religion, and 7, well, that is the guiding ray of the ray of Aquarius, and it's basically the spiritualization of matter, the bringing down of the most spiritual ray 1 into precipitation on the physical plane, ray 7. And so we see that each age is going to be very much characterized by a blend of rays of attributes, not the Trinity so much, rays of attributes. And so we see the ray of attribute, ray 6, devotion and idealism, in the age of Pisces, the 2,000 years just ended, being substituted by the ray of 5, concrete knowledge and analytical science. So there's our science, analytical. And it's nothing fuzzy or unclear about science. It's going to use its methods to eke out the truth with a clarity and a dispassion that doesn't involve emotion. Ray 6 is highly emotional. Ray 5 requires unemotional, because as the scientists work for truth, they may get answers that they don't want, and they can't put their emotional likes and dislikes into it. But this ray 5 is the changeover that we have to understand. And in that ray 5, concrete knowledge, we get that word knowledge. And people in these new age groups that I see plastered about on some of the social media are saying, yeah, we know, not Pisces, we believe, we know. Yes, knowledge as opposed to belief is important. How are we going to know if we don't investigate and we don't research? And this is what the scientists have started to do. And I'm going to be mentioning a couple of the quantum scientists very, very shortly. And how can you change rays so easily? Well, it may not be easy, but some of you may know that there wasn't anybody more devoted to Jesus in the New Testament than St. Paul. Highly scorpionic creature, St. Paul, but devoted to Jesus' teachings. You've only got to read the letters in the New Testament, 80 to 90% of which are written by St. Paul, to know how devoted he was on that ray 6. And what is St. Paul today? The masters tell us that he is ray 5 master, the master Hilarion, in charge of the scientific ashrams under the aegis of ray 5, concrete knowledge and analytical science. There he is. He's changed his ray. Okay, he was, 3rd initiation on the road to Damascus, and now he's 5th initiation in the hierarchy of masters, but he's moved from ray 6 to ray 5. And so must we. That's what I'm being told from within. When I go within and I put these things to my unconscious, that's what I get. You must become a scientist par excellence who can interpret the ancient wisdom. So Let's have a look then at the rays of Aquarius. And we have to remember that in bringing this down to the earth, we have three levels. We have a sign, Aquarius, we have a ruling planet, Jupiter, and we have the 11th house. And the sign is the most spiritual, the planet is psychological, and the house is mundane or terrestrial. And so we have that gradation. And at the highest level, Aquarius is 40% of ray 7, the ray of magic, which I'm defining as the spiritualization of matter. It's also called the ray of order and ceremonial. Ceremonial, very important in the New Age, and already in things like Freemasonry, there's some great seventh ray activity going on, which is highly ceremonial. We've had ceremonial magic with some of the great societies like the Order of the Golden Dawn, producing some wonderful manuscripts on their ceremony. That's ray 7, 40%, big chunk. Equally 40% ray 5, and this is the knowledge, and that was not in existence in the age of Pisces. So we have to do this shift, and why it's going to be hard for a lot of people is that we've had many incarnations in the age of Pisces. So we are kind of, it's inbuilt in us to react maybe not so well with some of the religions, or to find something we want to become devoted to. That's what ray 6 is about. But now we've got to move out in an objective fashion and start to dispassionately look at what is being given to us by the scientists. It's my view there. So the 20%, by the way, just to make it up, is ray 4, which is art and harmony through conflict. And I think certainly up until the year 2025, the Earth is in for a rough time. Dwaj Kul mentioned if there was going to be a third world war, that would be the end of humanity. He said it many times throughout the Alice Bailey teachings. We don't think that hierarchy will allow that to happen, but we look dangerously close at the moment. However, we know that through as Pluto stays, Pluto the destroyer for spiritual reasons, as Pluto stays in the sign of Capricorn, there will be upheaval, and that upheaval will continue until it goes into Aquarius in 2025. Which is also the year of the hierarchical conclave, where the masters get together and plan what the Earth spiritually will be set upon for the next period of time. So we're looking at cycles here. Tim's written a lot about cycles. We're looking at cycles and the changing of rays and the understanding what the changing of those rays means. And the idea that we have got a planet as well as a sign brings in ray 2. Now, ray 2 was also in Pisces, but it was the love aspect that was in in Pisces, not the wisdom aspect. Ray 2, love, wisdom. And the love came through the Christ principle and all that we're taught through Christianity, particularly. That was particularly the thrust of the Piscean age. But now we have the higher octave of ray 2, which is wisdom, and hence the need for knowledge. Knowledge is turned into wisdom by the application of the wisdom to our daily lives. And that's so important as well. So Aquarius is going to be exciting because we're going to build on the higher octave of the second ray through the planet Jupiter. And this itself will come through the 11th house, which is the house of group, community, humanity. That's the biggest group, sharing, and esoteric psychology and the rays themselves, where we get to know about ourselves. The injunction of the Delphic oracle, man, woman, know thyself. You can't change yourself unless you know yourself, and we are going to be required to change. Quantum physics is change physics for all time. Classical physics is only part of the story now. And so I know, and I not believe, researching, investigating, and using scientific rationale. So let's move now to more the nub of the talk, which is about the advent of quantum physics. Two of our greatest scientists in the last half of the 20th century, Albert Einstein, he wasn't really much of a mental slouch, was he? And Niels Bohr were in total conflict over quantum theory. And quantum theory, as for those of you that want to know more about it, I'll bring this book up at the end. You should start somewhere. There is a book there called Quantum Theory, a graphic guide to science's most puzzling discovery. And I won't say too much about it other than what these scientists said about it until we get to the center of our subject. Niels Bohr and Albert Einstein were great friends going back many years, yet constantly argued with themselves, and this would be in the 20s and 30s, 1920s and 30s, over the matter of whether quantum theory was really establishing itself as an honest science. This is what Einstein said of it all. The quantum theory reminds me of a system of delusions and an exceedingly intelligent but paranoid holding these delusions, which are simply concocted of incoherent elements of thought. Einstein thought that the whole matter of quantum theory was reminiscent of a schizophrenic, and many of the scientists today who still don't want to move away from classical or Newtonian physics still think that the world of quantum states is something akin to psychedelic drugs, just not real. However, we now know that the experiments, 100 years later, we know that the experiments prove that the quantum states exist, and there exists this disarray. And that indicates that we may, for some of our time, have to work in chaos, and that chaos has its objective as well as order. Opposing Einstein, even though a lifelong friend, Niels Bohr, often said to be the father of quantum physics and mentioned in the little book frequently that I've just shown you. He was an aristocratic Dane and he won high honors in science. He thought very differently. He believed that quantum theory was not yet fully understood. It was incomplete, but it was valid. And when this man came towards the end of his life, he chose the yin-yang as his symbol. And you'll all know the yin-yang. You'll all know the circle with the black and white half and a little dot of white in the black and a little dot of black in the white. And Bohr used it because he said this symbolized the idea of the wave-particle duality, which lies behind quantum physics, which we'll be discussing today. I need to mention to you, and again, it's covered in the little book, the famous two-slit experiment, which I have shown pictures of it before, but I don't spend too much time on it today, is often referred to as nature's conjuring trick. To this day, this is not understood why a particle of light measured as a particle, when it approaches not one slit, but two slits, two apertures, goes off and converts into a wave. And that wave goes through the two slits, and then the waves interfere with each other on the other side of the slit and cause an interference pattern there. And further, that is, if an observer with human eyes comes along and looks at that situation of interference, the interference pattern disappears, and it's called the collapse of the wave function, which tells us immediately that human beings have a quantum effect, and we're using it all the time. Quantum physics says you are changed by what you observe, and what you observe changes you. And this happens in the outer worlds when our gaze is towards whatever it is in the gross sense world, and the inner worlds when we turn inwards for meditation or sleep. What we see is not what we are. And the discovery of these tiny energies, I'm going to apply to the macrocosm, because if we accept, and I presume you all do, I certainly do, the hermetic axiom, as above, so below, then we can turn it on its head quite easily. And so what I'm suggesting we do is we look at a particular phenomena, entanglement, in the inner worlds, in the microscopic world, and apply it to the human, and I'm going to call it bioentanglement, so we understand the difference between the two. So, moving closer to our subject, we have this idea of overlap of two waves causing interference. And I'm also going to suggest to you that we have a complementarity that Niels Bohr talked about. Niels Bohr talked about something he called complementarity. He was on a skiing holiday in Norway, I believe, in 1927. Bohr came across what he believed to be the central core of understanding quantum physics and the wave-particle duality. His point of view was this. He said, although wave and particle behavior of an object mutually exclude each other, both are necessary for the full understanding of the object's property. I call this new situation complementarity. And many years ago, with sustained meditation on this, I was given the very clear insight that the particle corresponds to the physical body, and the wave corresponds to everything else up to the monad. The emotional body is wavicular. The mental body is wavicular. The higher mental body, the buddhic, the atmic, the whole of the soul is wavicular. And that's what a deva is. That's what an angel is. The solar angel that we refer often to as the soul. It is wavicular. And the soul, the higher self, the Atma Buddhi Manas, interferes with us when the time is right, when the life is right. And we know this from subjective experience, that emotionally and mentally, something else, we can say it's impressing on us or whatever, something is interfering with us. And it is the higher vibrational waves of the soul impressing itself on the mental and emotional bodies of the personality to move in a different direction, to get the particle to live a more spiritual life. And what was he talking about, Niels Bohr, with complementarity? If this image that I was given is correct, he was talking about the idea that when we come into a life, we dip in as a particle, and we die and we become totally wavicular. And then we have another life as a particle. And then we die to that and we become totally wavicular again. And I haven't got any fear of death, simply on that idea that when it's time for me to finish as living predominantly as a particle, I'll go into my wavicular mode. And nothing will be lost, because if Niels Bohr was right, and, you know, research him, and he's a fantastic scientist, if you will, he says both are necessary, the particle state and the wavicular state, both are necessary for the full understanding of the object's properties. In other words, we know we have to come down for particular experience, but our spiritual nature is wavicular. And always know that what the higher self is trying to do is impress on the personality's motivators, the mental and the emotional body, how to act in this life. So this idea of complementarity should, I hope, give you some kind of solace when you think, you know, I'm not the particle that is Paul Barker or Pam Evans. I'm not that particle. I'm acting as a particle whilst I'm in a physical body. Whilst we're in a physical body, we are very much restricted with our wavicular activity. When we die, we're not restricted. And it's interesting that in Esoteric Astrology, that's the book by Alice Bailey, in a number of instances, Dwaj Kul says, when we die, the individual enters the group. The particle becomes a wave, because a wave has, as we'll see shortly, a wave function. And by entangling with something, we become part of that wave function. We become part of something which is much, much, much bigger than ourselves. And if we've got any inclination of what death is about, we know we're going to be lost as an individuality, but reborn, not losing the particular qualities that we've already had in our experience as a particle on our many activities and lives on the earth. But it's time to become wavicular. And the masters can touch. The masters can touch particles through a process called overshadowing. How could the Christ overshadow Jesus without this process? Religion doesn't know how overshadowing works, and I didn't know how overshadowing worked until quantum physics provided me with, and if you don't want to say answer, but I think it is an answer, a plausible explanation of this overshadowing, because the higher energies, in the same way as our own soul, as I've described, will impress on us, we are talking about a reaction between waves. So our higher self will interfere with us, and we and our higher selves will produce interference patterns. And these interference patterns will indicate some of our personal path that we've got to go down, because the soul will be pushing us in a certain direction. And so the idea, taking it a little bit further, is into the macro world. We've all stood on a promenade at high tide, and we've seen the waves coming in and hitting the promenade wall and then coming back out again. What happens is sometimes the waves reinforce. We get a very large wave, or sometimes they cancel each other and we get peaks and troughs and peaks and troughs. And that's interference at a very obvious a macro level. Where the waves meet and reinforce, there is a peak, and when they cancel, there is a trough. This is what occurs in the phenomena of producing interference patterns. Okay, so one of the most important things out of this is that if interference is sustained and intense, then something which is called entanglement occurs. This is our, and again, how is it that we can take the third initiation and have the rod of the masters that are providing this provide extra systemic energy to the head chakras? Without quantum physics, how could that possibly be explained? So let's have a look at the idea of entanglement. Entanglement, as a definition, is sustained and intense interference. Entanglement has been proved between particles in the laboratory, and I'll give you some further examples that you can relate to in a moment, two particles can become entangled. The intermingling of two or more microscopic particles so that they lose their individuality and in many ways behave as a single entity is straight out of New Scientist. So how is it that two particles can lose their individual properties? It's because the particle transforms into a wave. The waves overlap and interfere. The interference is sustained, intense, and it becomes entangled. Think of your relationships on Earth. Are you entangled with people emotionally, which is wavicular, mentally, wavicular? Of course you are. To what extent is that entanglement? How much are you feeding the entanglement? Is the entanglement satisfactory? We often say, beware of what or who you entangle with. What about if you entangle with a dark arts society or a white magic society like the Lucis Trust and the Alice Bailey? You have got the choice we have got the choice with our free will as to what to entangle with. Entanglement came from a German word by Erwin Schrödinger, and there are two proponents in quantum physics who gave completely different ideas and aspects of how quantum physics works. This is in another book I'll show you in a moment. One was Werner Heisenberg, a German, and the other was Erwin Schrödinger. Erwin Schrödinger looked at it from the wave point of view, and Werner Heisenberg from a particle point of view. They both are able to bring each other together. There was a reconciliation that was able to be done. But it was so key player here in the quantum physics, Erwin Schrödinger. Entanglement, maybe when we first hear the word, implies a kind of maybe a helplessness in the face of knotty conditions. Nobody likes to think that they're entangled by that description, but it doesn't mean that at all here. But you can understand entanglement from the point of view of maybe an O.J. Simpson or a Paul McCartney. However, we're going to talk at the moment about entanglement. I believe it's a very beautiful idea when you apply it to the inner world. But if this entanglement is the case, then what happens is that there must be an energy, and because energy cannot be destroyed, it can, once created, and we're creating energy, but with a new energy with entanglement, it can only be transferred from one form to another. And I'll go into it in a bit more detail, but what we're going to be considering today is that the entanglements that we make, and they may already have been there, but the mechanism for these entanglements is the permanent atom of theosophy. Have a physical permanent atom, an astral permanent atom, and a mental permanent atom. So if we take when we're born into individual parents, how would we be drawn to those parents? If we'd entangled with those people in a previous life, then there would be an energy which exists across lives. And that energy will be existing in a condensed form in the permanent atom in between lives, and then released as the particular mental body, emotional body, and physical body is formed in the birth of that individual. And what we are saying is that because the entanglement can be at physical, emotional, and mental levels, that is exactly corresponding to where karma arises. Karma arises in the three personality vehicles on the physical, emotional, and mental planes. And so we can have physical karma, which obviously often results in accidents, injury, and illness. We can have emotional karma, which, if it's difficult, can bring us great pain. By the way, very positive physical karma can lead us into very, very, very old age. Very old age. Just like difficult physical karma can lead to a life being cut short. And I see this in the charts through the planets of Saturn and Mars, said to be the agents of karma in esoteric astrology. And so it all fits very easily for me, and that's why I have to pass it on to you to see what you can make of it yourselves. Because if these are truths, they're humanity's truths. They're not truths for the individual. They're truths to be understood and to be passed on. But I mentioned earlier that the wavicular level doesn't stop at the mental level in my understanding of the model of it, that it goes into higher mind and buddhi, divine compassion, and atma, the will of the soul, soul's purpose and intent. And therefore we can have spiritual entanglement, not just the personality entanglement, which is most definitely karma in my view, and I believe one day will be revealed to be the mechanism behind how karma works, being in the reservoir of the permanent atom in between lives until it's carried forward to the next. And so we have a dual situation to deal with here. We have to recognize perhaps that the husband or wife that we've met, we were kind of very familiar when we first met, and there was an ease of conversation and we got along well, as if we known each other before, or we haven't met before. Not in this life, but almost certainly our very close friends, obviously our family, and usually our partners. And for some people, that's a number of partners, because there's a number of karmic issues to be worked out with each of them. And so we have that to deal with. And that's our past entanglements. But what about the entanglements that there are spiritually, and the opportunities that we have in this life to entangle with something? And that brings me to just go a little bit further with this. Let's apply it now to the macrocosmic world. What about men who fought in the 2 world wars? They will be entangled with their buddies, soldiers who stood with each other in extreme danger. They were the only thing which existed in each other's lives, watching out for each other's back, because there was death at every point. This is still the case in our world today. So many friendships are formed under extreme danger and threat, this intensity, and they produce entanglement. So much so that when these soldiers go home, they find it difficult to adapt to civilian life, and they just want to keep having reunions with their friends who they fought with, because they're entangled. We are naturally entangled with our children. Male sperm and female ovum, the two are brought together to produce genes and chromosomes. But I think that's what science hasn't got there yet, is that there will be seen, just like it's starting to come through, that there may well be an aura, and this fuzzy aura of quantum effects is the aura that we know that clairvoyants can see, that there is emotional fuzz to the sperm and the ovum. And there is a mental part to them as well. Not so prominent in our stage of evolution, the mental part, but certainly an emotional part, because there's something, we may get onto it later if time allows, called superpositioning. So, bioentanglement, lifting the idea of entanglement, like with the soldiers, it could be a couple with ecstatic lovemaking who are together for a long time. Their auras are combining, and there is an intense interference, a sustained interference, which would also result in an entanglement. So bioentanglement will be taking the scenario with microparticles and extending it, as I'm starting to do, with living entities like a human being. This means that we can convey, through an interconnectedness between the particle that we are and endowed with and a particle that you may have been entangled with in the previous life, the meaning of that entanglement of the previous life comes out into this life. And that's what we say about our karmic obligations. We have to see something through, and we believe it is our karma to see this relationship through, or to see this project or piece of work through, or time spent doing some life project. And for me, in looking at this, permanent atom was shouted out at me because it's called atavism, the effect of the past on the present, that we may have existed in a previous life somewhere on the planet, and now we are being attracted back to those entanglements that we have already made. Bioentanglement arises when the phenomenon shifts into the world of living things. And remember, I'm doing this because of the Hermetic axiom, as above, so below. You know, to shift it from the microcosmic, where we've got evidence, and suggest, because of that axiom, that we can apply it. But you should be able in your personal lives to look at the situation and say, yes, I think there is an entanglement there. I can't get rid of this. I've got to carry on working here until I work through with the entanglement. Or you can add to the entanglement by staying with one person for 50 years, and then you'll be sure to meet up with them again, possibly in the next world, but more likely again in this world where things are more particular. I want to mention an idea that I had about relationships. Imagine two people who are married, happily married, Alice and Bob, A and B, Alice and Bob. While Alice is away on a business trip, Bob meets Carol, and Carol is married to Dave. And very clever there, they've got particle A, particle B, particle C, and particle D. Dave is also away at that time on the other side of the world and nowhere near any of the other three. So Bob and Carol get interested in each other, and as a result of that sustained interest, become entangled with each other. They forget their respective spouses and now strongly feel that they are meant to stay together as a couple. Such is the effect of the entanglement that they've created. Now, there may have been some past entanglement, but for keeping it simple, they have created in this life an entanglement by getting together, sharing auras, and the wavicular side, emotionally and mentally, that comes out of the physical liaison, is actually a very real and tangible energy. Now, mysteriously, we might say, Alice and Dave, who have never met, are also now entangled with each other. And there are American psychologists writing on this subject, because that's where I got this idea from, to mention this very, very briefly. But Alice and Dave have never met, but suddenly they, on the phone, they get in touch with each other, a way is found, they suddenly share feelings and thoughts that married people do without ever actually having met. Because, well, you could see this more easily with particles A, B, C, and D, because initially you had A plus B, Alice and Bob, and C plus D, Carol and Dave. Once Bob got together with Carol, which is B and C, we would then put a wave function around those two. So we had a wave function around A plus B. And if they'd never, left their bubble, good word from COVID, if they never left their bubble, they wouldn't have interfered with the bubble that was C plus D. But once B got together with C, that created another wave function. And because A was associated with B, and C was associated with D. They're all entangled together. So the way to look at this entanglement is to see it as a wave function. So if you become entangled with, say, to make it clearer, a subject like esoteric astrology, like I've done, you become part, if it is, first of all, you just scratch the surface with it, you're interfering with it at a mental level. And if that interference becomes sustained and intense, like a course of study would do, you become entangled with the subject to the extent that you become part of the wave function. And that means that you've got access to other parts of the wave function, which you normally wouldn't have access to. So I can pick out things about esoteric astrology that I've never learned. And you can do it, and you probably have done it with the subjects like Vedic astrology with Paul. You become so entangled with the subject that Paul Barker is part of the wave function of Vedic astrology, which means that he can pick things out, and he can ask me a question if he wants, or tell me I'm wrong, about things which he's never actually knowingly learned because of entanglement. So it's a wonderful gift in many ways if we're careful with what we entangle with. But of course, we could entangle with criminality. We could entangle with drug taking. We could entangle with things that aren't going to help us with our spiritual development. And, you know, it's emotionally neutral because we make the decision. We have the choice with what to entangle with. Okay, so I'm going to give you a couple more illustrations of this and then finish with something on the 777 symbolic lives that we have, something that I've related to the esoteric astrology that you may be interested in, but it's a suggestion. A lot of this, I have to say to you, as theosophists, you can, you can't hold me to, it's speculative. But I do want you to consider whether it could be true. And if it is true, does it have an effect on the way you're going to live your life? Because it's had an effect on me when I've had opportunities to entangle with someone. I thought, I'm not going there. I know what that's going to produce, so I'm not going there. And I know that, there are people also who, if they can accept this wave side of things, have said to me, well, death doesn't frighten me now, because if it is true, and I can see it every time, I'm a particle now, but that particle is always going to be mortal, but the wave is immortal. So you've given me a road to your immortality, and when you think about it, the wavicular side is our emotional side. And where do we go when we die? The astral world, the emotional world. And the mental side is also wavicular, and we know that Devashan awaits those who have put plenty of mental effort in as well. So we do know that there are places that we can go. All we lose is the physical particle sheath, and I don't even say we lose that. I say we actually convert it. Consciousness converts from living in a particle, which is a physical body and a brain, that's the particular side, the physical body and the brain, into something which is far, far less limited, which is the wave. I wanted to talk to you about the story of Cleve Baxter. Cleve Baxter was a guy who was working, and you may have heard this one before. I think it's such a stunning story to explain entanglement. Cleve Baxter was a guy who worked for the CIA, and he was working one particular day, 20 odd years ago, on a lie detector machine. And he was very hungry at lunchtime, and he went out of his a New York laboratory to buy some live brine shrimps. And as is the usual way in America, he came back with a basket full of them, and he couldn't possibly eat all of those. It was only lunchtime. And he halved them, and he had a big laboratory. And he went and put half of the live brine shrimps over the far side of his laboratory, near where the fridge was, to put in later on. And then he started to boil the other half of the brine shrimps. And as they jumped about in the hot water, he heard a noise from the other side of the laboratory. And he walked the 12, 15 feet to the other side of the laboratory. And there, the brine shrimps were jumping about in the water in exactly the same way, only they weren't the ones being boiled. This simply shows the effect of entanglement. There was one wave function between the brine shrimps, who presumably had all lived together in the sea before their capture and had entangled at a very maybe basic etheric level. You don't know about their emotions or their mind, but the etheric body is wavicular as well. The etheric body, the physical counterpart being the physical body, obviously, at an etheric level, they were entangled to such an extent, and he was absolutely amazed, and he was doing a work, as I say, of a very subtle nature in that case. So I want to say to you that all I could attempt to do with this subject this afternoon in the time that we've got, and one more thing to go through with you, is to try and see whether you've got an idea of pull or attraction towards what is going on in quantum physics, because I do believe this has been the greatest discovery in my life, and is going to feed the rest of my years. It may not just stay with quantum physics. I'm fascinated by astrophysics and the black holes in the universe as well. And I'm looking at all sorts of things to do with dark matter and dark energy, and superstring theory, and all of the ideas of bringing together the advancing sciences, both out there in the macrocosm and down here, as I've been talking today, in the microcosm. That'll do me until my particle life finishes, because there is nothing, I don't think, any more important. So if you wanted to read the full story in highly readable form, it may have a different cover now, because this was came out 2009, I think it was. Somebody called Manjit Kumar, Kumar, Quantum, Einstein, Bohr, and the Great Debate about the Nature of Reality. That's what we're looking at in theosophy. It's the nature of reality. What is the and we've had to be fed top down so far with the teachings of the masters, but now we've got a chance to go bottom up and see what the scientists have said. Okay, this book doesn't link, like I'm trying to do, with theosophical concepts like karma and reincarnation and life after death, but what it does do is give you a grounding in thinking in a different way. And goodness me, when we pass over the chasm between this life and the next life, we're going to be required to think in a different way, because we won't have our brains any longer. So if we've been encouraged to think outside the box at this time, then that's really helpful, because people say, oh, quantum theory is counterintuitive. It's not what we expected it to be. Well, unless we're prepared, life on the other side may not be what we expect it to be. So at least be open-minded to it if you don't want to take it on board. I find the whole thing absolutely enthralling, and I'll be doing more talks on it in any case. I've had to see to a number of other factors recently, but I'm back on the job now, as it were. I've done some work, very briefly, just one page here, on the 3 astrological crosses and their quantum correlation. Now, in astrology, we have 3 crosses. We have the mutable cross, which is made up of 4 particular signs. I mean, it doesn't really matter what they are, but I'll mention them when I come to cardinal, because they're the most important. We have a fixed cross, and then finally we have a cardinal cross. And all the wisdom around any astrology, but particularly esoteric astrology, is around the crosses. And the cardinal cross is said to be one of each of the earth sides. So cardinal earth is Capricorn, cardinal water is Cancer, cardinal air is Libra, and cardinal fire is Aries. And those 4 signs, because they are the way they are numbered signs 1, 4, 7, and 10 are in a cross. They're the Cardinal Cross. I believe relate to the symbolic 777 lives that have been talked about in various places in the wisdom. The first, it's symbolic because I don't think we have to live this many lives at all. In fact, when I'm doing my esoteric astrology, I'm told, tell the person they've had 500 to 600 lives on this earth and they haven't got too many more. But let's consider it as 777 for this reason. 700 lives, the vast majority of those lives are lived on the mutable cross. This is the relatively disorganized state of personality vehicles of each individual, which attracts experiences randomly. And can't we see it in some people's lives, leading to confused, even chaotic circumstances in life? There's no guidance from the higher self in these early lives, and they do go on, obviously, 700 out of 777. We are simply gaining reaction capacity in physical, emotional, and mental matter. That's all. And so there is not the input of the higher self. I have correlated that to something, all these are in the book, by the way, the uncertainty principle of quantum physics. And in the uncertainty principle in quantum physics, there is no real prediction of all the qualities of a particle's life. And so we're saying, strictly speaking, this is Heisenberg, I mentioned him before, Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. Even an electron cannot be, you cannot have its position and its momentum at the same time. All factors are not known. And that's what happens primarily in the life of 700 lives on the mutable cross. You don't know what the outcome of the life is going to be. It can be a short life, a long life, a happy life, a sad life, and you go through it again and again and again and again. If we've gone through that, we've done well. We reach the 70 lives of the fixed cross, where the personality is, to some degree, under the hegemony of the higher self, which means that personality experiences are determined and controlled to the extent that they produce specifics in the individual's life, which are related to their soul's purpose, which is directly meant to transmute all of the karma that is there. And therefore, this has to be entanglement. So our main subject today, entanglement, must be around the fixed cross. And therefore, if I make the suggestion that all the participants today we've done our early part, we've done our 700 symbolic lives of just getting experience and going through the whole gamut, physical, emotional, and mental. We've now got some input from the soul, which is guiding us on a spiritual path. And look at the work that Paul is doing, that Tim is doing, that Barbara is doing, all of you here are doing. You're doing a certain amount of work which you're guided to do. And that's because there's in my view, an entanglement existing between your higher self and your personality to guide you to these things, which isn't happening with those on the mutable cross. And so our first quantum principle was the uncertainty principle, which was for those on the mundane cross. The second is entanglement, hence the importance of this subject for a group of theosophists like yourselves, not just theosophists, you have other interest in other areas, but you are interested in the spiritual path, because I'm quite sure to different degrees, we're all under the hegemony of our higher selves, including myself. And then maybe something for us to come, the 7 lives, the Cardinal Cross encompasses the qualities and values pertaining to both the mutable cross and the fixed cross that are now layered in the third principle, which is called superpositioning. And the superpositioning is a combination, putting everything together. It's a synthesis. And this is what the monad wants to do at the third initiation. It's quite clear from the Bailey work that the Cardinal Cross is very much associated with the third initiation, where the monad becomes the initiate's observer, and total freedom from form can ensue as a result of superpositioning, giving us a complete, synthesized, and total picture of reality. So we're all on this journey, as a summary, we're all on this journey to know what full reality is. But we have to look maybe now to this wonderful emerging science of quantum physics to maybe get some leads about how things work. Because what we've been given with the wisdom, maybe the what of it, maybe the where of it, maybe even through the process of evolution, the why of it. Now, quantum physics promises to give us the how of it. That's what's exciting to me, the how it works, the mechanism. And if we know the mechanism it works, we can work along with it. And remember, the only way to transcend something